Today's episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast is brought to you by Poor Richard's Cafe and Star Local Media. Poor Richard's Cafe, Plano's oldest restaurant since 1973. They are open daily from 5:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., serving the three most important meals of the day: breakfast, lunch, and dessert. It is true Texas home-style cooking made with love and grit. That is Poor Richard's Cafe, located off of Avenue K in Plano. Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Devin Hasson and Taylor Raglin. Hope everybody enjoyed their 4th of July festivities last week. And we're back with another episode and another continuation of our ongoing high school sports awards series, the Varsitys. Seventh straight year that we're doing this, looking back on some of these standout moments throughout the previous athletics year. So whereas last week we discussed some of these standout games within our coverage area, we're going to shift gears and talk about some folks who are obviously very instrumental in these programs for sure, but with all the the spotlight that we put on the athletes, and just the exploits that they showcase throughout the school year, let's talk about some of the folks that are in charge of helping mold those athletes and recognize some of the best coaches from our coverage area over the previous school year. So for this part of the podcast, we'll talk your two markets, Devin, Mesquite and Rowlett. Go some Plano and Allen talk between me and Taylor. So let's start, Devin. Whether it's Rowlett or Mesquite, who gets your nod for Coach of the Year for the Varsitys?
Well, in the Rowlett-Saxe area, we're going to roll with. There's a lot of great candidates, obviously, with the amount of success that those two programs have all around. But we're going to roll with our Star Local Media Boys Basketball Coach of the Year, Zach Mikesell.
That's a good pick.
Over at Saxe. Saxe, since they became a varsity competing program in 2004, that has enjoyed just huge success across the board. Every team has made the playoffs at least 6 times coming into this year, except for boys basketball. And it's always been a little bit of an enigma trying to figure out why they haven't been more successful. They had just 3 playoff appearances in their history coming into this year. And a lot of times those were, kind of limping in 4th place type runs. And, really, it was a program in disarray. They were 2-25 in 2017, 2018. Their coach left in December. A longtime coach left in December. There was discontent between the parents and the coaching staff. And it was just, it was a program in shambles, basically. Well, Zach Mikesell was an assistant coach with a very successful Lakeview program across the way. And so he saw this firsthand, being nearby and playing them a couple times a year. But he also saw talent over there. He saw potential. And he took the job. At the end of the conclusion of the 2017-2018 season, instantly went about instilling a different work ethic, a new, mental approach, a winning approach. But it was tough because he basically had the same group of kids that had suffered through this 2-25 season coming back. But he was able to instill in them a new work ethic and a new mindset, and it started to pay off. They picked up some nice wins early in the season, started to build that confidence, started to build that motivation, and carry it through in a district play. That's a tough district with a very good South Garland team, a Wiley team that was state ranked for a lot of the year. But I think that was one of the signature wins, is they hit a buzzer beater to win 63-62 over Wiley when they were state ranked, proving that they could compete, not just compete with, but beat one of the big boys. And it carried over into their first playoff appearance since 2016. They set a school record for number of victories. With 18, so when you go from 2 wins one year to 18 the next, with virtually the same cast of characters, that just shows you what an impact a great coach can make.
I remember the year before Mikesell got there, covering a non-district game between Plano and Saxe, and not really having much backstory on Saxe heading into that, so I just kind of assumed they were just like every other Saxe program. And then when Plano beats them, they beat them by like 25 points or whatnot. And then you figure out after the fact that, Saxe's been in a bit of a down period, and then those two teams play each other again this previous season at a tournament up in Frisco. Plano had just come off a thrilling victory over Little Elm. RJ Hampton and all that. I mean, just what was, I guess now, pound for pound, their best win of the season. They turn right around and play Saxe again, and Saxe beats them in overtime. And it was a lot of the same Plano team from the season before, that just handled Saxe. So just to see that kind of, I mean, you kind of had an inkling right then and there. And then I think they beat Plano West later on in district. So they were knocking off some PISD teams left and right. So you kind of had an inkling beforehand that, okay, something's a little bit different around campus.
Yeah, and you can just tell by the way they conduct just even something as simple as warm-ups, just the kind of the way they approached it, and just their mindset, and just kind of the confidence they carried themselves with, going out each and every game, believing they had a chance to win. You're not going to win them all. It's still going to take time, for them. They're not where they want to be, certainly, but the strides they were able to make in year one was certainly remarkable.
For one of my picks for Plano was another first-year head coach, albeit one that's fairly familiar, to folks around the Plano area. Jeff Clarkson with the Prestonwood boys basketball team. Clarkson, who had spent the previous 5-6 years over at Plano East, his alma mater. Did some good work over there with the Panthers, a couple district championships, a 4-round playoff run in 2013, I want to say. But then he goes and he joins Prestonwood, which is far and away the most credentialed basketball program in TAPS, at least of this decade. Just state championships out the wazoo, Julius Randle, Zach Peters, I mean, just a laundry list of just star-studded players that have come through that program. Clarkson takes that over, but you look at what happened this season, and it was really unlike any year that Prestonwood's had. I mean, first off, their best player, their best returner, Justin Webster, he transfers before the season starts. He transfers to a military academy out in Virginia, so just like that, a Prestonwood team that was already going to be pretty low on returning experience, they lose their, the heart and soul of their team. And just you look at how their season unfolded, and just injuries really kind of prevented them from ever really finding a whole lot of just continuity during the regular season. They were really up and down. I want to say they hovered right around 500 for much of the regular season. So, this is a Prestonwood team that, you could go, over the past, there were 3-4 year stretches where they lost, fewer games than they did, combined, just this past season. So you weren't really sure what to make out of them, in a sense, like when, once the playoff starts, they weren't even ranked, in hindsight, but then, just they get healthy and things kind of all fall into place for them, and they catch fire. They take down teams like Bishop Lynch and John Paul that swept them during the regular season. And I really think in a sport like basketball where, continuity and chemistry is so key just between the 5 guys that you have on the court. So, for as long as that team had to go without some of the key players in their rotation to be able to, work them back in, just in time for the playoffs, going up against these teams that had a little bit more on that side, like a team like John Paul, which, their 5 had played so many minutes together, and then, they play Prestonwood in the state semifinals, and then PCA beats them by 13. Just a complete role reversal from the regular season. Ultimately, though, they fall 1 win shy of getting another state title. They lost in overtime, I want to say, to San Antonio Antonian, 70-67. But still, for a team that wasn't even on the radar as far as being a title contender when the playoffs began, some great work up there with some of the best work that Clarkson's done in his strong coaching career. Taylor, where did you land for your Plano Coach of the Year?
Well, I think it was a weird year because you have guys like Joey McCullough. I think what he did with Plano East was a good year. Certainly helped by the talent and the growth and the chemistry like you talked about. It's important in basketball, but just for the kind of the unique nature of what he was asked to do, I'm going to have to go with Justin Waters of Plano West Volleyball. Yeah. Just because you're handed the keys to the program literal weeks before, I think less than 2 weeks, if I remember the timeline correctly, before the start of the regular season, and asked to take this team that, the expectation from the beginning was deep playoff run. You look at Amon Njaye, Joe Presley, just everybody that they had on that roster, under the previous head coach. It was already an expectation, but then you kind of throw this wrench in it that, now this new coach, this interim head coach with the interim tag is being handed the keys to the program and asked to go do this with, girls he'd been around. Mm-hmm. He was in the program and coaching as an assistant and all that good stuff. But still, that's a tough sell. And then you couple that with the fact that, they get out to this hot start. All this hype is building. It looks like he didn't even miss a beat. They're state title contenders, and all of a sudden they just drive into the ditch for no reason, apparently, in the middle of district play. watching them during that slump that they had was completely different than watching them during, regular season preseason play. Their communication was horrible. They looked like they were getting at each other, like they were. It was just a weird scene. And then all of a sudden, he rights the ship again. And I believe the last 6 games of district play, they were 5-1. They bought in, I think, to what he was saying. He's significantly different than coaches they've had in the past as far as technical stuff, and I think maybe some of that came into play, some frustration. But like I said, they finished 5-1 in district. The one loss was to Prosper. A really close 5-set match. They were officially back at that point. They hit the playoffs. They run all the way to the regional tournament where they beat the Prosper and the Woodlands combined 6-2. Didn't even get to 5 sets in either one, and then make a state tournament appearance, lose in the state semifinals. But still, just the job that Waters was able to do on such short notice, taking over that program. I don't know how much notice he actually had, but at least from an outsider's perspective, not very much. And being asked to kind of get all that together and utilize the talent that you have and make that kind of run is pretty impressive. And obviously, it earned him the dropping of the interim tag. He'll be back. They should be back. They bring back pretty much everybody. So, but yeah, just his efforts and taking over that team and kind of guiding them through that mid-district slump that looked like. There were times where I was like, are they even going to make the playoffs? It was that bad.
Oh yeah, that's a district, and I'm sure the quality of the district had something to do with that as well. That district did send 4 teams to the third round.
Yeah, absolutely. Had it been a softer district, it's a lot easier to survive a stretch like that. But yeah, with Prospers and McKinney last year and
Plano.
Even Boyd, all those teams running around that are just consistently good, you can't afford that kind of stuff. So for him to kind of pull them out of the ditch right at the right moment and lead them on that run, I think he edges out guys like Joey McCullough and some other coaches that had good years.
Let's circle back around to you, Devin, man. So what about Mesquite? Where was your Coach of the Year pick out in Mesquite?
We're going to stay with Mesquite High.
Okay.
Old Mesquite, Jeff Fleener. And I think, and his staff. In football especially, it's such a staff thing, and he'd be the first one to tell you. He said it over and over again. Hey, our staff has done a tremendous job. But a Skeeter team that went 1-9 in 2017, and it wasn't just the fact that they went 1-9. It was some of those losses. 61-0 against Saxe, 45-7 against Rockwall, 61-3 against Longview. Obviously these are very good teams they're playing, but those are lopsided margins. Yeah. And Coach Fleener he was very straightforward about it. He said we weren't strong enough to compete. We just simply weren't strong enough to compete with those kind of teams. Mm-hmm. And so they spent the entire off season. They were the second that regular season ended, they were in the weight room, getting stronger, building stronger. And it paid off last year. They go 5-5. So a 4-game turnaround. They could have been 6-5. They lost to Lake Highlands in the opener, and they started building a little bit of momentum, building confidence, kind of like we talked about with the Saxe boys basketball. Yeah. They beat Plano West. They beat LD Bell. They were leading Grand Prairie in a game. We had all that crazy weather last year, and one of those games that wasn't able to start the second half, so it went as an unofficial game, but they were up in that. And then I think the game that really opened people's eyes was when they were able to beat Horn in the district opener. Horn had been the class of Mesquite ISD, at least among 6A programs, a perennial playoff team, and a team that handled Mesquite with no problem in 2017. Well, it wasn't the case this time. Mesquite was strong enough to compete, and they went head-to-head in a defensive battle that went down to the wire. Mesquite's able to kick a last-second field goal, or actually as time expired, to win 2017. And that was just kind of a signature moment for a program that had been on such hard times the previous few years. But then again, they faced a little bit of adversity the next week. They lost to Rockwall Heath 6-4 in that wheels off score there.
That's right.
Yeah. So the 2 safeties and one touchdown. Yeah. It was bizarre. Yeah. But then you kind of question. You said, okay, is this team going to fold now? Mm-hmm. The toughest part of their schedule. They have a playoff berth within their grasp. But are you going to let this derail what has been a solid first month of the season? And they didn't. They were able to stay focused. They beat North Mesquite the following week, and they were able to help take care of business against Tyler Lee to effectively clinch a playoff berth with 3 weeks left in the regular season. They did lose to Rockball. They did lose to Longview, but they were competitive games. There were games they led early in both.
Yeah.
So a far cry from it, and that's another sign of the progress. They're not to the point, and Coach Plano and that staff will be the first one to tell you, we're not there yet. We're not near where we want to be. But the fact that you go from being just outmatched a year ago against a heavyweight like Longview, and to be competitive with them and to hang with them, the eventual state champions, just show the amount of progress they were able to make from 2017 to 2018, and they hit the off season with that same kind of vigor, that same kind of enthusiasm. So really curious to see what lies ahead in the fall from that Mesquite team in the third year under that staff.
As far as Taylor, our picks for Coach of the Year out of Allen and Lovejoy for that matter. With Allen, you can go in a bunch of different directions for this. I mean,
how do you choose?
With Coach Best with the wrestling program, it's like you could give it to him every year. It's like Bill Belichick or Greg Popovich. You can make a case
Gamble,
for them every
kind of the same way.
Yeah, Coach Gamble with the football program, and then you look at what like a first year coach like Kelly Thompson did with girls soccer. But when I look back on just this this previous school year with Allen, I was just so impressed with the work of the girls basketball team, and there's something to be said for a team that it all kind of comes together for that one dream playoff run, and they just a program that's that achieves those new heights. And this was a program that had never been past the third round, and just for them to because it was kind of like Plano West volleyball in a sense that like this team had lots of talent on paper, and you were hearing rumblings at the start of the season from other coaches around the district like, keep an eye on Allen. This Allen team's got a chance to be something special, and a lot of it had to do with them getting Nia Green back from Bishop Lynch, and McDonald's All-American obviously always helps, but this team and following them throughout the season, and just the ups and downs in district that they went through, because for all the talent that team had, they had multiple blowout losses on their ledger in district play that I was there for firsthand. So just getting to see it all kind of fall apart at the seams, and them losing at to Plano at home by 20 points in their district opener, and an Allen team that we had just finished I believe for our preseason pre-district rankings, crowning them the district champions, and then they go out and just get run off the floor by
tough district, man.
By Plano. No kidding.
Tough place to play.
But then, and then you look at the on the back end of the first round of district, Prosper just demolishes them in the fourth quarter. And there were times when, kind of like Plano West, where you just couldn't even make out what Allen was even doing out there. Like there were times when they just kind of were looking around at each other, like they were five different players thought they were running five different plays, and just this team, like for all the talent that they had, there was just something between the ears that just kind of was a bit awry when adversity struck during some of these district ball games. So you're thinking kind of at the midpoint of district play, like, okay, what is this team even going to be? That they've got. They have the talent, obviously, but that's in the Metroplex. That's not enough. When you look at some of the programs that you're going to be seeing in the playoffs, like you need much more than that. So then over the second half, you notice that they make some tweaks to the rotation. They're willing to experiment with some new defensive schemes and whatnot, and then it all kind of slowly starts to round into form. This team late in the year starts really showing a knack for coming through in the clutch. I think of their rematch against Prosper that they won at the buzzer as kind of the a harbinger of things to come. And then, head coach Teresa Durham just pushes all the right buttons there in the playoffs, as far as just kind of getting this team back on track mentally, and then just kind of looking at what happened in the playoffs with, I think a player like Sydney Adams is almost like an avatar for what Allen was able to accomplish in the playoffs, just from a tactical standpoint. Like Adams, who she hits that game winner against Saxe, so she's right there in the closing minutes of that game, has the biggest moment of that victory. And then in the fourth round against Pflugerville Hendrickson, she doesn't see the court until the fourth quarter. So just the Durham's willingness to kind of adapt game to game and not just kind of roll with just the same approach, and which can be tough on players too, because it's there's some buy-in that's required in that, and making sure that players are okay with understanding that, okay, you did this one game, might not necessarily be a guarantee that you're going to have as much of a role the following game, but she inserts Adams there in the fourth quarter and has her just provide just some spark plug on defense, against Michaela Woods, who at the time had scored 40 points against them, and Adams is in there clamping on her in the fourth quarter, and they end up. And that was kind of what the just the defensive spark that Allen needed to finally pull away there in that game, and then she turns around, starts Adams in the regional finals against Prosper, and Adams leads the team in scoring. So just to get that kind of buy-in from your players and to look what they were able to, kind of overcome and realize that potential that they showed in flashes early in the season, the adversity that they had to battle through in the middle of district, and for it to be rewarded with far and away the team's best season ever. This was a program that had never even been to the regional tournament. So for them to, parlay that into a trip to the state semifinals, where they ran into a Judson team that just wasn't going to be denied that year. Still just head and shoulders, just some great stuff by Coach Durham and her staff as far as getting the best that they could have conceivably out of this Allen team. How about you, Taylor? Let's close out the first half with your Allen / Lovejoy Coach of the Year.
It's / Lovejoy for sure, because like you said, Allen has some slam dunks. Best gamble, the ones we've already talked about, and Lovejoy kind of had a mini Allen year this year too. Todd Ford with the football program, they made the second round. They got rolled by Alito, but that's
who didn't.
It's going to happen. Brittany Lee coming on to the softball program in her first year had a really good year. Jason Wilson with the baseball team, really tight series against Frisco Lone Star in third round. Gets them knocked out. So lots of good candidates and a really good year across the board. But, it's not often that a coach that I'm going to name Coach of the Year is no longer with the school or the program. But that's what's going to happen here, because I'm going to go with Jason Nicholson of the Lovejoy volleyball team. Lovejoy volleyball is synonymous with state tournament appearances, state championships. They're making deep postseason runs every single year, pretty much regardless of what's going on. But at the same time, it's not easy. It's not like you just run,
especially at the 5A level.
Yeah, it's not like you just run your team out there and say, okay, we're Lovejoy. Here we go. Just where's our state tournament appearance? Nicholson, obviously, during his time at Lovejoy was, I think 2014, 2018, really influential. State title in the first year under him. 2 trips to the state finals, including this last year. And again, they were just dominant this year. They just, it's really incredible to me that they didn't end up taking home a state title just because of how dominant they were. Even in the state tournament, the state semifinals, it was like I'm just going to be covering a state champion tomorrow. It just seems like they were set up. It didn't happen, but like I said, a weird situation, because Nicholson leads them all the way there. And then after the season, we find out that Ryan Mitchell, who led Lovejoy to 5 consecutive state championships before Wilson got there. Not Wilson, Nicholson. I mixed up my Jasons. And then departed for South Lake Carroll. He had returned last season as an assistant and the girls' athletic director. Now, the obvious implication is that he returned under the condition that, he was going to be the head coach again at some point. So Nicholson gets rewarded for his state championship game appearance with the boot. So a weird situation for sure, but it doesn't diminish the fact that, Nicholson and that team were clearly the school's most dominant program. And I think along with that, he deserves, the title of best coach, even though, like I said, no longer employed by Lovejoy. It's a weird deal.
Very much so, very much so. So, and that's a look at least a few of the Coach of the Year candidates from our respective markets. We'll bring in Bryan Murphy to talk some of the schools in his neck of the woods, Frisco, Little Elm, Celina, plus some of our picks for some of the Denton County schools, and we will get to that after a word from this sponsor. Today's podcast is brought to you by Star Local Media. 14 newspapers and websites with a print distribution of 270,000 homes and monthly page views of 600,000 online. Star Local Media, your community voice for news. And now, let's get back to the podcast. And we are back. We have subbed in Bryan Murphy for Devin Hasson as we continue our discussion for some of our best coach selections for the 7th edition of the Varsitys. So with you on the roundtable, Bryan, we'll be talking some Frisco, some Little Elm, and some Celina. Plus, Taylor and I will give our picks for a few of our Denton County markets, as well as McKinney with Kendrick Johnson being out today. So, Bryan, whether it's Frisco, Little Elm, or Celina, what is your first pick for Coach of the Year?
I want to start this off by giving some love to Little Elm and Jill Miller and that Little Elm softball team, reaching new heights this year. Prior to this season, no Little Elm sport had ever made it to the regional tournament. That had been that Achilles heel, getting it past that third round. And not only did the Lady Lobos softball team make it to that regional tournament. They made it all the way to the 5th round. They defeated El Paso Chapin, who was top 3 in the state at the time, and they got the 1-game playoff against those guys, and they beat them 4-2, a game that many people didn't pick Little Elm to win. So then that set them up in the 5th round, new unfamiliar territory for Little Elm there. And if it wasn't for the Colony, that big beast with All-American Jada Coleman and all those superstars they have, and I think they could have really made a legit run at state with Jill Miller as the head coach. 2nd year with the program. Last year, she came over from Naaman Forest, a team that really hadn't, had a whole lot of softball success. But, she made the move over to Little Elm and led them to the playoffs, led them to a first-round playoff series win over Frisco Independence, which is huge for the program. And then this year, they took that to new heights, making it to the 5th round. And, it's only fitting that Jill Miller's my Little Elm Coach of the Year. She was our all-area softball team Coach of the Year as well, our first ever softball Coach of the Year, Jill Miller. So big year for her and the Lady Lobos there. And I'll be meeting with her later this week for a really interesting feature story. I'll just leave it at that, and I'll let y'all check that out later this week, so make sure to stay tuned for that.
Nice little teaser right there. So then, you mentioned our all-area pick for softball Coach of the Year. When you look at just some of the coaches that sprung from our Denton County markets, as far as a first year goes, it doesn't get any better than leading a team to a state championship in your first year. And, what a job that Jamie Siegel did with Flower Mound Volleyball in hindsight, our all-area Coach of the Year for volleyball. And just, the anecdote that Justin Thomas dropped on her from her at the very start of the season. As far as just kind of setting expectations, when so at the start of the season, Coach Siegel told her players to select which finger they'd like to wear their state championship rings on. And I think this is Flower Mound Volleyball, a solid program, at least as far as, Metroplex programs go, but not like you're taking over like Allen football, where like a state championship is the expectation every single year. Flower Mound Volleyball had never been past the 3rd round, in their history. So for Coach Siegel to already right out of the chute walk in there and basically declare a state championship expectation for a program that just had never, flirted with those kinds of expectations, and for them to follow up on that the way that they did, and that just kind of shows right there just the kind of coach that Coach Siegel is, as far as kind of instilling that confidence and just that swagger into her players, and with a program that took it and ran with it like they did, and just some of the heavyweight teams that they knocked off, not just in their own district, with Capel and Marcus and Hebron, Hebron, which had won the previous 3 state championships, but then in the playoffs to not bat an eye when staring down number 1 ranked Byron Nelson or South Lake Carroll, which has been just head and shoulders above the Metroplex in volleyball for quite some time now. And then Taylor, you saw Fort Bend Ridge Point against Plano West of the state tournament, and then Flower Mound turns around and beats them in 4 sets in the state title game.
It didn't look particularly hard at any point in the state tournament. I covered both those games, and they were just kind of out there doing their deal, and they were loose. I think that's kind of one of the bigger, right in the state semifinal game, it seemed like there was some, in the state final, I guess, as well. That big of a stage, there's some initial jittery stuff going on, but they settled in quickly, and they were loose, and it kind of seemed like their tournament to win, and they did. It was a clinic for sure.
A team of seasoned vets for a program that again was playing that far in the playoffs for the first time ever, and I think a lot of that just from a sheer just mindset and work ethic standpoint, a lot of that kind of is a reflection on Coach Siegel, and just you think back to the start of the year and just the job that she did getting those kids prepped for something that I don't know if when she came over she saw a state championship caliber team in her players, or if she could have had I don't know, the equivalent of us playing for her. She still would have been instilling that kind of belief in them. But nevertheless, just what a debut, and they've still got a ton back heading into this season. So I'm sure those expectations are not changing anytime soon over in Flower Mound. Taylor, let's talk some Lake cities.
Sure.
As far as a nice little bounce back year for Lake Dallas, just as an athletics program as a whole, really benefited from the move to a new district and a new region. So as far as Coach of the Year candidates, where did you land on this one?
I think there are 2 clear winners in this category, which luckily enough there's 2 of us, so I'll leave one of the obvious.
Both of them.
I'll leave one of the obvious ones for you, but I'm going to take arguably there's an argument for both of these guys, but for Ryan Howard and the baseball team, you could almost argue that he deserves this award more than any other coach just because of what he had. And I'm not saying the Falcons were bad. I mean, you have to have talent to make a run to the regional semifinals and go that far in the playoffs. But at the same time, it wasn't like they were a Colleyville Heritage. They just weren't. And they would tell you the same thing. I mean, Ryan Depperschmidt, definition of a gamer, great elite high school athlete, really competitive. Cade McCullum had some absolute gems. Ben Price, Ryan Hull in the lineup. There are guys that are certainly very talented baseball players, but they weren't on the level of, I see this team threatening a run to the state tournament, and that's what happened. And I think that that run combined with just the overall kind of atmosphere and attitude of that program, combined with the fact that Howard's now going on to take a job at Coppell. I mean, that's not an easy job to get. It's a coach and Ryan Howard that he was clearly a huge part of what happened. He was clearly a huge part of making that thing go and getting those guys to buy into this kind of really competitive together attitude that they had that carried them so deep into the playoffs. And like I said, he's being rewarded now with, one of the state's premier jobs. You want to say the area's premier jobs, but literally Coppell, I think, is one of the state's, best jobs. And he's going to get a chance to go over there and try to give them something that, they haven't had. So, I think just for his work and really taking a team that looked middling and average at best in district play, barely got in the playoffs really. I mean, they were tied for the 3rd and 4th seed, won a play-in game that turned out to be hugely important because you avoid Colleyville Heritage in the first round. So you win that play-in game over Denton Ryan, and then all of a sudden you're just off to the races with basically the ultimate definition. I mean, you talk about Allen girls basketball in the first half. They had more talent than Lake Dallas baseball, but a really similar feeling of, this is a true team that made this run, not the fact that you just have Bobby Witt or whatever the case may be. And not saying the Colleyville Heritage, that was all. I mean, that team was just absolutely stacked this year. But yeah, for Howard's work and just kind of getting all those guys to buy in and go on that kind of a run, I think he's obviously as deserving as anybody over there.
And if not Coach Howard, then the other case can be made for head coach Brandon Martin of the Lake Dallas boys soccer program, which it's kind of been because Coach Martin's been there longer than 3 years, but you just think of just the past 3 seasons and just the steady ascent that program has been making. Like back in 2017 when they finished, I want to say it was 5th in the district, and a team that was good enough to have made the playoffs, but they just could not catch a break in shootouts. They had something like a 1-6 record, I want to say, in shootouts that season. But then the following season in 2018, qualify for the playoffs, win their first ever playoff game, and almost make it into that 3rd round. You were there to see their late loss to Lovejoy. And just to see now what this team does entering 2019 with because this unlike the baseball team, which that run kind of came out of nowhere, you could say. I mean, the soccer team was there were now true blue expectations of a program.
I was really high on them coming into the season. I thought this was absolutely a possibility, and I thought even watching their run that that regional final game, that could have gone either way. I mean, I was out there. If you saw my tweets from that day, it was 35, 40 mile an hour winds and freezing and raining. It was awful conditions. So who knows if you play that game in 75 degrees and bluebird skies, maybe that's different and they don't lose to eventual state champion Bel Air. But in any case, it was the expectation. There's something to be said for a coach that lives up to an expectation. There's 2 ways of looking at it, Howard and Martin.
So just to take the kind of the lesson learned from that loss to Lovejoy in 2018, and just the just the motivation to play until the end, just to grind these games out until the absolute last second, because that's what ended up doing in Lake Dallas against Lovejoy. It was a goal in the 80th minute that they allowed. So then to see that just kind of how that mentality is rewarded, and it is kind of ironic then just the number of close calls that team had, as we talked about last week on the podcast with that crazy first round game against Saginaw, which is almost the absolute definition of playing until the absolute end, with 2 goals scored in the last 15 seconds of regulation and overtime, and then just some of their subsequent playoff wins. I mean, just a team that really had just a mental toughness that hadn't really fully been realized the year before. And like you said, I mean, you play that regional final in under normal weather conditions, and who knows what happens. But nevertheless, just the absolute halcyon age for Lake Dallas boys soccer right now, and head coach Brandon Martin has a huge hand in getting the Falcons to that stage. Brian, so let's see, Frisco and Celina. Which let's pick one of them. Where's one more Coach of the Year candidate?
Do I have to pick just one in Frisco? I mean,
how did you even figure one out?
I don't know. I mean, I could have gone with Chad Cole or Brooke Klein at Reedy. Obviously, Chad Cole, the football coach, Klein, softball
really
coach, taking them to the 5th round. You can always pick Coach Jeff Rayburn, the Lone Star football coach. Coach Andy Holt, Wakeland boys soccer coach, making it to state for the 3rd year in a row. I mean, the list is endless. It's almost impossible to narrow it down to one. But, there's a program in Frisco that hasn't missed the playoffs in a decade. And a man that's been there for most of that time is head coach Ross Reedy. And he's one of the most entertaining guys you'll ever meet. I don't know if y'all met him.
I mean, I got to interview him a little bit after the state tournament and whatnot.
Oh, yeah. So you covered their game against Amarillo. And, I mean, would you have thought that they just lost the state tournament and the way he spoke to you?
Oh, no. He's a very, very matter-of-fact guy and very, very relaxed. And you can see that's...
And so he's got some funny mannerisms about him. He has this superstition about having to drink a Coca-Cola. It has to be at the scores table every game. I don't even think he drinks all of it. I think it's just there. And he told me earlier in the year, he's like, man, I got to stop doing that. I'm getting fat. I'm getting old. I can't do this anymore. But yeah, no, he's a phenomenal coach. The battles that they had with Lone Star and head coach Katie Stinton, and I know those two are really good friends as well. And just the fact that he has taken 2 completely different teams to state, within the last 4 or 5 seasons. That teams of Jordan Hamilton and Rebecca Lescay going in the spring of 2016, taking a pretty much a brand new roster for the most part just a couple months ago to state, and they had Amarillo against the ropes. So like you said, you were at that game. They could have very well won state, but Coach Ross Reedy, he knows what he's doing, man. He knows the X's and O's better than anyone, and he put a team that had one superstar, but didn't have that didn't have that Jordan Hamilton type player, didn't have that best player in the state. They didn't have an All-American, but they just had a really good collective group of seniors that really bought in, to Reedy's philosophies and whatnot. And even though they're losing a large chunk of their roster, big chunk of their starting lineup, I expect them to be back in the playoff mix for sure, back in the district title mix. Just because of Ross Reedy, he's just that good.
Because the way that they play is something that it really is a mindset. Like a team that really does adopt a defense first mentality. A team that was going to absolutely grind out games, and it's not for everyone. It's not that's that kind of style of play is not every player can be tailored to fit in the system like that. And to get that kind of buy-in and just what they did. And I was at that state title game against Amarillo, and I mean, for 3 quarters, they had them. They had the Lady Sandys on the ropes there, and ultimately Amarillo's top shelf talent won out. But I mean, I was just so impressed with just the job that team did defending what was, at least up to that point, had been just one of the highest scoring teams in all of Class 5A.
Oh yeah, and defensively, like you just mentioned, a lot of their scores were really, really low. In the game before that against Kerrville Tivy, that final score was 34-28, and that Tivy team was pouring 50, 60, 70 points a game, and they suffocated them against Lone Star. The very last time they played, that score was 43-39, and it was only that high because they went to overtime, with the shot by Randy Thompson and whatnot. And then the game before that, it was, I don't remember, that was in the 30s as well, one of the showdowns they had during the regular season. So defensively, man, it's that philosophy that Reedy implements, and it's just so suffocating to play against. You're really playing against a team and a great coach and a great scheme, rather than just playing, in basketball like we've seen, if you have 1 or 2 superstars, or even just one, they're hard to beat. But a team like that's so well coached, always tough to beat.
You pick a coach that led his team to the state tournament, and that was sure enough out in McKinney, where Kendrick Johnson landed on his pick for Coach of the Year. Sure enough, it was. Once that baseball team had finished their run, the award was Brooke Court's to lose. The job that he did, getting the Broncos to just to uncharted waters. Again, another team that, like I said earlier, with like Flowermont volleyball, had never been past the 3rd round. Boyd is this wasn't a team that really they were just on nobody's radar at the start of the season as far as being a team that would have been capable of something like this.
Yeah.
They finish third in their own district. A team that shows well. I mean, they took a game off Allen, an Allen team that went to the third round, and were competitive against some of the other elites. But it's not a team that you ever like, okay, watch out for Boyd come playoff time. And then, I mean, that playoff run is just something that I'm just not sure I'm going to forget it anytime soon. Just
those
some
game
of the,
threes, man, it's crazy.
I mean, they won 8 consecutive elimination games.
Man.
I mean, you might not find a team, like at least within the first 5 rounds of the playoffs, that just put together a more mentally tough playoff road. Just with, I mean, losing game 1 of 5 consecutive playoff series, and then to be able to turn, or 4, I should say, all against teams that were state ranked. They played Heath, Allen, the Woodlands, Cy Ranch, all ranked within the state's top 15, and just to have the resolve to continually bounce back. I don't know if you got a chance to cover Boyd last year, Taylor, if you talked to Coach Court at any point.
I was, I think the only time I covered him in person was that weird game with Plano West, where it was the walk-off that everybody thought was, interference, non-interference was he in the it was a really weird game. But yeah, I mean, I spoke to him briefly after that, but not a ton.
The thing, he's one of those coaches where, because he coached at Lovejoy for a bit too, whether it's a win or a loss, his demeanor doesn't change. He is a very stoic, calm, there's a very stoic, calm way about him. And I think that for a team whose calling card really was mental toughness, I think that's the kind of is whether it's you're a coach or just anybody in a position of leadership, your staff, oftentimes, how you compose yourself, it's they kind of take that and run with it as far as how they, if they see you nervous, then they're going to be nervous, something like that. So I think that, the fact that they had a coach that just literally doesn't, he's an incredible poker face, I'd imagine, and the fact that they were able to, this was a team that never really budged despite being, despite facing some really, really just long odds throughout the postseason, and to have the, the best season in program history to get to the state tournament. I think that's all a testament to the mental toughness that Coach Court instilled in those players. Brian, where did you land on Celina for your last of your 3 Coach of the Year selections?
So this one went to a coach, it was her first time ever coaching at the high school level, period. She's got over 20 years of coaching experience collegiately. And then, finally, heading in, Kristen Cole, she wanted to be there more for her son. She wanted to, make a more point of emphasis being there for her family and this and that. And, that high school level or the college level, she came from UTA where she was an associate head coach. Before that, she was at West Texas A&M. And obviously, she had a 4-year career at Notre Dame. She was an All-American in her high school in Southern California. She is a hooper. She's a basketball player. She knows what she's doing. She's been there and done that. And, she was like, man, I want to step down, but she still wanted to coach. And so she stayed with the high school ranks, and a lot of 6A schools came a calling. There was some area 6A programs that are some very good schools, very good teams that had their eyes on her. But she chose Celina. She was sold by the aspect of the Bill Elliott and the great man that he is, and just the community as a whole. And she adopted a team that had missed the playoffs the year before. They were very, very young, going through a bit of a rebuilding stage. So it wasn't easy, for Coach Kristen Cole. And then when I spoke to some of the players, early in the season, and they reminisced on their time in open gym about a year ago this time, the first time ever seeing her. And Kristen Cole, she's 6'3", she's an imposing force on there. She's very loud, she's very intense, and she takes pride in that. So you'll hear her. You mentioned coaches that are very stoic, and while she has her moments, but she also has her moments on the basketball court. You're going to see her, you're going to hear her. She gets fired up just as much as her team does, and she led them to the playoffs. Granted, they had to face Lincoln, state-ranked Lincoln in the first round, tough draw, but she had them back in the playoffs, and I expect them to be back in the playoffs again next season. This program is in great hands with Coach Cole.
Awesome. And that is a look at some of our Coach of the Year selections for a handful of our markets for our latest installment of the Varsitys. I guess the other Part 2 categories that we'll have this week are, Best Performance and Biggest Upset, in addition to Best Coach. So be on the lookout for those in the papers and on our website, starlocalmedia.com. And that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. So we'll be back on Thursday to, break down a couple entries from our ongoing summer question series. And in the meantime, folks, you can keep enjoying your weekend. We will talk to y'all later.